Hello guys, and welcome to Car Talk with Martok. I mean, you know,
yeah,
I feel like we're in a car. This is again relevant still somehow to, in a remote way, to the Klingon Cardassian War because of a meme with the Car Talk on Martok. If you don't know, find out. It's worth it. It's good fun.
And to be honest, this is probably about the size of the interior of one of those little fighter-sized birds of prey.
Yes. Yeah, you get those on like the Negh'var. You have like the internal like layout, and it's like they fit a bird, like some kind of bird of prey. It's like, how on earth are you doing that?
Everything below a certain, there's probably like a Klingon fleet law that says everything below a certain size must be a bird of prey.
Yes,
because let's face it, have we ever seen a Klingon shuttle?
There's been some stuff in like Beta Canon, like STO and that, but no, like they always just. Whatever they need, it's always like, let's just get a bird prey that's smaller.
The escape pods are just mini birds of prey with folding wings.
Yeah, pretty much. So I suppose we should pick up on the conversation we were having yesterday. I think we covered a lot of bases. So there was one thought I just kind of had, and that was, have the Klingons, with the Klingon Cardassian War, did they manage to just get themselves completely stuck?
I think they may have immobilized themselves to a certain degree. Not entirely stuck. I think that they could have pushed on, but it would have been a very kind of, if you like, a very risky maneuver. I think if the Federation hadn't stepped in and gone, no, we don't like this, then they probably could have pushed through, because if you think of the number of forces they obviously would have had at the Federation front line, like even if the Federation had sat back and gone, no, we're not actually taking any part in this, all of those forces could have been redeployed to the Cardassian front.
Yes.
So...
yeah, because that's an interesting choice in and of itself, that randomly, about halfway through, Gowron's like, okay, now's the time we're going to invade the Federation. And possibly there's some timeline there that could help explain it. Like, it's possibly during the Battle of Sector 001 that's happening, because in that happens at the start of Season 6 of DS9 when they change to they're in the process of changing to the new uniforms, like we see in First Contact. So possibly there's the attempted Borg invasion, and the Klingons are like, okay, now's a good time.
Well, War of the War is Season 4, isn't it? So
yes.
Yeah. I think, to be honest, it may have just been the Klingons getting a little bit ahead of themselves, because as we said before, you know, they were ready for a war for the first time in ages, and someone was probably pushing Gowron, well, you know, if we're going to go to war with the Cardassians, can we go to war with the Federation as well? And then you're handed this opportunity of, oh look, the Federation can be argued to be working with the Cardassians because they didn't let you brutally slaughter their civilian government.
Yes.
And then Gowron's like, yeah, well, stuff it, we're at war with them as well. And then they realise that, you know, all of their strategic planning didn't actually, you know, work. All their plans were predicated on attacking the Cardassians, and we see at the beginning of the War of the War, you know, the Klingons were even, at least on paper, willing to let the Federation join in. So kind of their probably middle case scenario was, we fight alone, you know, great glory to everyone who's not stuck on the Romulan border. Best case scenario, the Federation joins in and it's even easier.
Yes.
And worst case scenario, the Federation refuses to help and sits on the sidelines. They probably didn't factor in, what if we end up at war with the Federation as well? And then Gowron goes and declares war on the Federation
as well. Yeah. Well, yeah, that is interesting, because basically with the kind of, you think about what the Klingons are claiming they're doing, it's not exactly outside of what the Federation might sometimes do. We're going into this troubled area to do some peacekeeping. We're going in to restabilize it. And it's like, yeah, Federation, maybe less so in Next Generation, but like in original series, they'd be willing to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, well, it's the whole kind of, their leadership is corrupt - evil - has been replaced with shapeshifters. Basically, no, we don't have any intentions of doing horrible, nasty things to the population as a war of conquest. But their leadership is bad, and we must go in and replace it for the good of everyone. Shades of almost every war since 1950.
Yes. Yeah, we don't have a problem with the people. We have a problem with the leaders.
Yeah.
But that involves us.
That just happens to involve us shooting a lot of the people to get to the leaders.
Yeah, because that does bring up another point I wanted to raise, because in the episode Rules of Engagement, where Worf is put on trial for destroying an alleged civilian transport, it's like, what on earth is a... And it's also like Sisko says, you knew that there were civilian vessels in the area. It's like, what on earth were Klingon civilians doing, like, this far away from the borders of the Empire?
Yeah, it's... Well, I suppose it's probably one of those things, isn't it, of you've got the fighting somehow in a 3D environment is occurring on borders. And you do even see it these days, and to a certain extent even back in the days of World War One and World War II, where people are like, no, the fighting is happening here. And so if I go over here in this other place, I can have my normal civilian life and nothing bad will happen to me because the fighting isn't happening here.
Yes.
Which usually ends up ending badly. I mean, World War One, World War Two, you end up obviously with the U-boats kind of making the entire Atlantic into a battlefield.
Yes.
And actually, in some ways, I guess there is maybe something of an analogy to that especially World War One, when U-boats were a new thing. They're kind of a little bit like the Klingons with their cloaking devices, and we know that that it comes out in that whole episode that the Klingons were using cloaked ships to do hit and runs kind of away from the main front lines.
Yes.
And that's why Worf fired in the first place, because he was basically on a hair trigger. And yeah, so there hadn't been up till that point a full-on war that involved cloaking devices, because they were kind of coming in as a new technology in TOS, and they just had a big war.
Yes.
And then you don't have obviously a Klingon Federation war, because they've got the Khitomer Accords. As far as we know, there's not a full-blown Romulan Klingon war.
There's something, but that's both sides having cloaking devices, so it takes on a very different dimension there, because basically in a cloak-on-cloak engagement, the winner is whoever can work out where the cloaked enemy ship is, decloak, get the torpedo off, and then recloak, and that's that. Yeah, and I suppose in that case it kind of becomes almost more like, if you want a modern analogy, a war fought entirely by submarines. Yes.
And a lot of if there's any conflict at all, a lot of it's probably going to involve one side or the other going after somewhere that they have to decloak to attack, like a space station or a planet.
Yes.
And the other side is either waiting or not waiting, or sends in reinforcements under cloak, as opposed to a more fluid fleet engagement.
Yes, yeah. You are kind of more tied to like fortifications and things. So that the whole arc kind of ends in Apocalypse Rising. They're at Tiger Core, which is like an interesting setup, because it's not one massive station. It's this like whole complex of like stations and fortifications and stuff. And the name Tiger Core would suggest it was set up by Gorkon. And if you look into like the beta canon of Klingon Academy, it may have been actually designed specifically to counter other Klingons, to defend against traitorous Klingons, rather than any potential outside invader. Because it's also at the heart of the Klingon Empire. It's deep in Klingon space. Like, what good is a fortress there? Oh, it's for holding your own territory.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, I think this is the thing, the single biggest threat to Klingon internal unity seems to be the Great Houses, because, I mean, it's in one of the Season 7 DS9 episodes where Esri basically calls out Worf because she's like, well, the Klingon Empire probably deserves to die because there's so much corruption in it, and how many times have we been told to step aside and not do the honourable thing for the good of the Empire.
Yes.
And you think about how many problems have been caused in the Star Trek universe within the Klingon Empire by different houses trying to do their own thing. It's like,
Yeah.
that you had the House of Duras at the point where Duras was still around, almost threw them into civil war because they wanted the High Chancellorship at any cost. Then they actually did throw the Empire into civil war with his successors. And you have house politics is constantly coming up in primary canon and in beta canon, and even to a certain degree the whole Gowron Martok thing that ends up with Gowron getting stabbed, to a certain degree you can see as a house thing, because as Martok points out, he's raised up to as head of the House of Martok and a great warrior in general, despite the fact that he is a lowborn Klingon.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, because another kind of aspect to touch on is, we've mentioned how the Klingons wanted another war, and I'm also thinking, did Gowron need a war to prove himself? Because, okay, he has the Klingon Civil War, but I can imagine very quickly people going around saying, yeah, but, I mean, come on, you were basically fighting a child.
And you won with the help of the Federation.
Yes. Well, you would say, if you're being charitable, you'd say the Federation just ensured fair play.
Yeah, but if you're a political opponent of Gowron, you can see in the high you only won with the help of those honourless Federation dogs.
Yes, and by the fact that you only became Chancellor because Worf killed Duras, and so you just became Chancellor by default.
I wonder if in the future Worf is going to be maybe by the 31st century Klingons or something, especially in the aftermath of all the collapse of civilization. We've already got the Church of McCoy, so maybe the Klingon version is Worf, the great chooser of chancellors, because in the TNG DS9 timeline, the last Klingon High Chancellor to pass his mantle on semi-peacefully was Compek, and since he died, every single Klingon Chancellor that we see in Alpha Canon has come to their position because Worf killed the guy who either held the post or really wanted the post. So eventually Worf is just going to be raised to this semi-mythological status of he who chooses the next Chancellor.
And I also love, in DS9 you even have that scene where Sisko basically nudge, nudge, wink, wink, fix this problem.
Yes.
Which is a bit of a departure from Next Generation, where Picard gives him a real telling off. I say he gives him a real telling off, but there's not really, because it's Next Generation, there's no real consequences.
No, he's not demoted or reassigned from duties, he gets a harsher punishment from Sisko when he's later told he'll never be on the command track. Yeah. Although it seems from the trailers we've seen from Picard Season 3, even that didn't stick.
Yeah, well, it's...
yes, TNG Picard was like, I highly disapprove of you going out and randomly stabbing a man to death, Mr. Worf. Carry on.
It's like if one of us went over and killed one of the US presidential candidates.
Yeah, just imagine the fight that, it's especially since we're British, you'd be like, we're allies of the United States. We've come here to help out by flat out murdering one of your presidential candidates, so you only have one choice. And obviously that presidential candidate is, for some reason, yes, of course, that's fantastic, because I have all the power.
Yes. So I think, to an extent, this war was Gowron proving himself properly, because they also, as we said, with the matchups in the Klingon Civil War, he's got Vocha and no one else does.
Yeah.
Of course he was gonna win. Quite what the Romulans were supplying the House of Duras with to defend against that, who knows? And for it to seemingly take effect so quickly as well.
one suspects they were probably like standard weapon shields, probably components to allow them to build a fleet faster.
They might have also supplied a lot of mines as well.
Yeah, but I suspect, again, like you said, given the nature of a Klingon Romulan war is always cloak, I suspect some of the quote-unquote help might have been, the Romulans' plausible deniability level strikes.
Yeah, just anything that's sort of near the neutrals, their side of the border.
Because if it gets blown up, it's like, well, it belonged to Gowron's faction. It was blown up inside Klingon space. Clearly, it must have been a very sneaky cloaked attack by some of Duras's supporters. There's like, actually, because when you see the tachyon grid, when they get it working, it shows a ton of D'Deridex, and it's like, of all the ships in the Romulan fleet, possibly the least inefficient cargo-carrying vessel in the galaxy is the D'Deridex.
With a massive hole in the middle.
Yeah, so there's like, why are you sending half a dozen D'Deridex warbirds as a cargo transport fleet? Something doesn't add up here.
Yeah, you'd think you would send, something. Also, people have been asking me about 24th century uses of the Nova, and I've been saying, well, because it's antimatter driven, and because of its size, where it's too big to be an escort but too small to be a useful capital ship. Yeah, essentially cargo running is probably the only thing it does, and internally, in sort of internal cargo runs, that would work. And also, again, plausible deniability. You could always say that the House of Duras were renting them or something.
Yes. Yeah, given them a number of border skirmishes, I'm fairly sure the Romulans have got a bunch of Klingon ships they've captured, and the Klingons have got a bunch of Romulan ships that they've captured. So if it's from older, if you use older stuff, you say, oh yeah, well, everyone knows the House of Duras had 6 old Romulan Novas hanging in a museum somewhere to show the glory of their house. Well, clearly they must have just recommissioned them, and they're showing their contempt for the upstart Gowron by blowing him up with old Romulan tech.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair, would actually be a fairly big slap in the face in terms of Klingon.
Well, that does bring out a point. I was just thinking about how you do end up with. I was thinking World War One. I don't know if there was anything in naval terms, but I know the Russians, they were so hard up for rifles that they ended up using Arisakas, which were Japanese-made rifles, and they had fought the Japanese
10 years earlier,
10 years before, and it was just but obviously they had captured a bunch, and then there was oh, do you mind supplying us the ammo now?
Yeah, that was a very weird point in World War One, because the Japanese still had a bunch of Russian pre-dreadnoughts they'd captured or salvaged from Tsushima and the other battles of the Russo-Japanese War, and the Russians were still hard up for ships, so you get a bunch of ships that serve for about a decade in the Japanese Navy, and then when they're all at war, the Japanese are like, well, would you like some of them back? We'll sell you them back.
Oh, that must have been the biggest insult, though, isn't it? It's the pride the pride of your fleet sold back to you.
Yeah. Just because they're feeling a little bit more sorry for you, and also by that point they've got their own obsolete ships they prefer to use, but it's an easy way of shuffling some semi-useless ships off on someone without having to say we're decommissioning them.
Yes.